You know, I used to think open world games were empty because the maps were too big. I'd look at a desert or a massive forest and think, there's nothing here. But I was wrong. The size isn't the problem. The problem is where the game thinks you are standing. Most open worlds are built like a stage, and you're the only actor. But the 10 games we talked about last week, they did something much braver. They built a world that didn't care if you showed up or not. Welcome back. This is episode 2 of The Questions Nobody Asked. If you haven't seen the first part, where I listed those 10 misunderstood games, go watch that first. It'll make this conversation a lot more useful. Today, I want to talk about the soul of these games. There is one specific invisible thread that ties Wei Shen, Henry, and Deacon together. And it's the reason so many people quit their games after just 2 hours. Before we dive into that pattern, if you're finding this new frame helpful, subscribe. Episode 3 is going to be a deep dive into the one game that actually broke this pattern, and you'll want the context from today to understand why that was so devastating.
With your death, I will find peace.
Here's the insight nobody tells you. Those 10 games aren't empty. They are indifferent. The developers of Wei Shen's story didn't want to make a worse GTA. They wanted to make a world where the character's identity was being swallowed by the environment. The world had its own gravity. In Deacon's journey, the bike running out of fuel isn't a bad mechanic. It's the world refusing to acknowledge your importance. The rain doesn't care if you're in a cutscene. The horde doesn't care if you're low on health. When a game stops centering you, it starts feeling real. It stops being a game and starts being an experience. But that shift is uncomfortable. We've been trained to expect the world to revolve around us. When it doesn't, we call it bad design.
What are you waiting for?
If you're starting to see why you might have bounced off these games, subscribe. It helps me know we're on the right track with these deeper dives. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize this isn't just about video games. We spend so much of our lives trying to be the main character. We want the world to recognize our progress. We want the icons to show up when we do something right. But the most meaningful moments usually happen in the gray areas, in the places where we aren't centered, where we have to adapt to something bigger than us. Ben's studio and Monolith weren't just making open worlds. They were building mirrors. They were asking, how do you act when the world isn't cheering for you? That is a heavy question for a Friday night, but it's the only one worth asking.
We knew you would become personally attached.
You tell Mr. Lee that his people stay the fuck out of our territory, and in return, we'll let him live.
So, 10 games, one pattern, the refusal to center the player. Next week, we go deeper. Episode 3 is a single game deep dive. It's the game from last week's list that takes this identity problem to the absolute extreme. It's the one where the protagonist literally forgets who they are because they're trying so hard to fit into the world's center. Subscribe so you don't miss that one. It's the most personal script I've written so far. See you in the next episode.
Nice of you to drop in.